welcome everyone once again. And now I'll do the official beginning. Today, in my honest conversations, I have a wonderful guest, Lisa Romano. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, how are you? Wonderful to be here.
I'm good, thank you. And it's good to have you. Thank you for joining us. In fact, Lisa is actually also has studied with some of Mind Value teachers. She just told me, and I'm very, very pleased with that. I feel smug. So thank you for sharing this. And today's conversation, we are going to be talking about emotional trauma and how consciousness is beneficial on your path of healing the emotional trauma. And before we go into the conversation, I want to read out the bio. So Lisa Romano is a certified life coach, best-selling author, and YouTube vlogger specializing in codependency recovery and mental toughness training. She's also one of the most She's also one of the most listened to meditation teachers on the world's largest meditation app, Insight Timer. Lisa was voted the #1 most influential person of 2020 by Digital Journal and one of the top 10 most influential women of 2021. Lisa creates real-life tools to help people evolve past their traumas so they can live in peace, achieve success, and create harmony in their lives regardless of painful past events. Her 12-week breakthrough codependency program has helped thousands of people learn to regulate their emotions, heal from painful pasts, including negative self-talk and limiting beliefs. Adult children of alcoholics and those raised by narcissistic parents are learning to find their way back to the love they were denied as children through Lisa's transformational work. So welcome, Lisa, once again. Now, finally, we are going to jump into the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I know in your bio there were quite a few times mentioned codependent relationships. And, it's such a strange thing, but since August, I've had 2 or 3 conversations already on codependency, which is so strange. It's like this topic has been haunting me. Not that that I've been seeking out this conversation, but somehow it comes up over and over again. So I think it's important. But before we go into that, I do want to ask maybe like a question / disclaimer, because I've noticed that your program to heal with from emotional trauma is 12 weeks, which is a fairly long time, right? Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned that that consciousness can help you heal from emotional trauma. But my question is maybe a little bit from the medical angle, how likely it is that a person can heal from emotional trauma without help? Should a person try to heal from emotional trauma without help, or is it necessary to actually talk to professionals when you have an emotional trauma? And when do you know when it is necessary? Maybe there are milder traumas and more serious traumas.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to always, if you're struggling, if life has become unmanageable and mm-hmm. you find that you are not being able to manage your emotions, you find that you're highly triggered, you find that just no matter what you do on your own, things are just not working and you feel powerless and out of control, I think it's always important to go speak to a qualified licensed therapist, always. Maybe even a medical doctor in some situations. Have your hormones tested and things, get a physical. And so I think that is important. Regarding the kind of work that I do, most people that come to me are people who have gone down the traditional path. Many of them have tried medication. Many of them have been in therapy for a long time. Many of them have been in 12-step meetings. And they're at a point now where they just don't want to talk about what's wrong. They actually want tools to fix it. And that's why I love this topic, because if it wasn't for the ability for me to understand consciousness, for me to understand that the mind is mostly subconscious, it's 95% subconscious most of the time, that hit me like a ton of bricks as someone who struggled with codependency. It made sense. No wonder I am this way. No wonder I seek approval. No wonder my relationships are unhappy. No wonder I obsess about how someone behaves, and then I try to control that behavior. It could be no other way, because as a little girl, I was emotionally abandoned, which is akin to death. When a child feels abandoned by their mother, by their father, for any reason, it could be emotional, it could be unloving, I don't love you, it makes you feel like you're unworthy, that threatens your attachment. And that threat to attachment is akin to abandonment. And abandonment is akin to death. So our survival brain kicks in, and it wires itself for protection. It wires itself to be afraid. And the brain has a negative bias. So of course, I have a strong negative emotion. My brain is wired accordingly. My brain is actually wired to pay attention to that negative thing that might happen again. But it's also wired to avoid that thing from happening again. That's where we get stuck. Because when I'm 3 or 4 or 5, 6 or 7, I'm learning to cope with this 7-year-old brain with how to avoid being abandoned. And so I've fallen after my mother. I tone myself down. I shut down my feelings. And so I'm below the veil of consciousness. I don't know that my brain has been wired to fear disappointment. I know nothing about consciousness. Children are in a theta brainwave state, which is a hypnotic brainwave state, up until the age of 7. So I'm not conscious, but yet I go out into this world thinking that I am conscious. And yet I'm operating from a subconscious pattern or a subconscious program. I remain codependent. I remain asleep in myself. I'm not connected to my spirit. I'm slowly dying. It's an emotional paralysis, but yet because I'm talking and I'm breathing and I'm thinking, I'm having conversations, the assumption is that I'm actually awake. So you can be awake and be conscious, but not really conscious.
I think at this point, it's really important to define how do you talk about consciousness in the context of your teachings? Because I know that consciousness has a pretty wide definition, and it's from one end to the other, it's not quite the same thing.
Correct. Well, I think that, I can only speak to what ideas have actually helped me. And so the idea that helped me was that there are layers to consciousness or levels to consciousness, just like, and there's no such thing as separation. So when a child is born into a sleep state. So are they conscious? Not really. So, and then a child moves into a theta brainwave state and so on. And so I define consciousness as understanding that you can be conscious and alive and have conscious thoughts, but yet be unaware of who you really are. You can be detached from your true consciousness or outside of the mind. There are different states of consciousness. And if you are suffering from trauma, then you're arrested at that level of consciousness, which is what the brain was designed to do, until you're able to unlock that trauma and free yourself. You can do that with a higher state of consciousness or practicing consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Of course it does. I do want to get back a little bit to what you said a little earlier. You said that you work with people who have done all the traditional routes and still it doesn't work for them. So how come, why is it even happening that a person goes to a doctor, to a professional, to a psychotherapist and doesn't get healed from their emotional trauma? Is it something with the system? Is it the way therapists work, or is it is it the problem of the person who doesn't get help?
I think we have separated the self. We've cut ourselves up into these little pieces, and I think that is very unfair. So modern psychiatry doesn't pay attention to spirituality. There's no blend. Modern psychology doesn't pay attention to neurology or neuroscience. And yet, when you blend neuroscience and psychology and spirituality, you have the most whole understanding of what a being is. I am not just an organic brain and a bunch of neurons. I'm spirit. I'm consciousness. I'm not just a mind that thinks the thoughts that it's been programmed to think. I have the ability to observe my mind. And so until we get on the same page, and until modern psychiatry, in my opinion, understands this idea that my mind is wired to remember bad things. My mind isn't doing anything wrong when I recall that car accident that hit that dog when I was 7 years old. My mind is designed to remember that because it was painful.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important to know? Because there's nothing wrong with you when you can't get rid of that memory. There's nothing wrong. You have neural pathways that were associated to that event. You should remember that why, so that it doesn't happen in the future, so that you don't let your dog off the leash and maybe experience that trauma again. So if I walk into a therapist's office and I speak for 45 minutes about the conversation that I'm having with my husband that just goes round and round and round, and the therapist doesn't ask me or doesn't dig deep into why it is that thing that I'm upset about might be unique to me as it relates to a subconscious association, then I'm never going to get to the root of why I feel this way. So I think we have to start understanding that trauma is locked in the subconscious mind, and that only through metacognition, which is the ability to observe the way that you think, which animals can't do that. Only human beings can observe the way that they think and speak. So when we use consciousness to allow us to observe the way that we think, we can unlock these experiences in our past that have traumatized us and locked us. We're not crazy. We're not crazy. There's a neurological reason for why we're trapped and we keep going back to that experience. And so we have to start addressing what's happening at the subconscious level. And that's why I create guided meditations with theta brainwaves to access that area of the brain that was traumatized when we were children. And if we can get people to have a strong emotion at that level, like love, like self-acceptance, like oneness with all that is, then we can help the brain rewire itself for self-love. And so now, rather than me thinking thinking myself as bad or there's something wrong with me, my self-perception changes at a subconscious level. So my consciousness around who I think I am changes. And when I use consciousness to my advantage in that way, I can actually rewire my brain and free myself of the past.
So I want to ask this question. We have talked about codependent relationships on this show quite a few times now. The first time I'm actually face to face with the statement that you help people heal from that. I mean, of course, all my guests have do that, but I suddenly realized that we often discuss the essence of the codependent relationships per se, but not so much how to get out of that. What is your observation? What is the most difficult thing about healing from traumatic experiences, from traumatic relationships, or even getting out of them? What is the most complicated thing? Why people actually struggle with that?
When you start to understand that codependency is neurology, trauma is neurology. When you understand at a base level, your brain was built for one thing, and that's to help you survive. So if I'm a little girl and I have a mother who is highly abusive, she's dismissive, she's indifferent to my feelings, that triggers my need for survival. At a very young, early age, I learned that I have to be quiet, because if I don't, my brain reacts with fight or flight, as if opening up myself and speaking my truth is going to threaten my survival. It feels like death at a neurological level. My brain can't tell the difference. If as a little girl, I spoke up and I was hit, I was abused, I was treated with indifference, my brain learns, don't do that anymore, to keep me safe, to avoid the abandonment, to avoid the rejection. What the problem with healing from codependency is, when someone like me says, you need to set a boundary, your brain gets triggered on a neurological level. Your defenses come up. What do you mean I have to let go of seeking approval? That's akin to death to me on a neurological level. So my defense mechanisms, my fear of abandonment, are going to override when I say you need to set a boundary. Unless that person understands, wait a minute. So when I'm seeking approval, I'm really trying to avoid feeling abandoned, which is akin to death. So it's not me, it's my programming, it's my brain. Yes. So when people begin to understand this at a neurological level, they stop beating themselves up. They understand that I stayed in this traumatic relationship for so long because I was afraid to leave it, because at a neurological level, leaving it forced me to let go of the survival strategies that were keeping me safe. This is neurological. When people begin to understand that it's not their fault that they've been in this toxic loop, that their brain is actually trying to keep them safe by keeping them in a familiar route. When they use consciousness, when they say, oh, so that's what my brain is doing, that's what my mind was doing, I was below the veil of consciousness, I was acting out a pattern, that's where freedom happens. And it's not just enough to show people that's what's happening. You have to look at what's happening at a subconscious level. It's not enough, because as you know, if you don't reinforce this information, it doesn't get rooted in long-term memory. It's gone. And that's why my program is 12 weeks long. It's to give people the best benefit of reinforcing consistent information, hearing it over and over and over in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 100 different ways. This is why this happened. It's not your fault. And this is what we can do about it. And eventually it begins to sink in. And the meditations are all designed to release shame and to help people learn what it is to reframe how they see themselves. Because so many people feel broken. How do I tell you how I feel and release trauma if the person who is supposed to love me has conditioned me to think that the being and the object that I am is bad? Can't. Because if I reveal that to you, my fear on a subconscious level is you're going to reject me if you really know what's going on with me. So I have to hide myself. And now in a codependent relationship, I'm seeking your approval.
So I am tempted to ask you about your own journey, because you did mention somewhere in the descriptions that you chose this path because you came from a traumatic codependent relationship. If you don't mind, do you mind sharing your story, and how did you come up maybe with your method? What prompted you? Where did you learn? Yeah.
Well, I was born to 2 adult children of alcoholics. And so both my parents were dry alcoholics. So my grandparents on both sides were alcoholics. I grew up in a home where we were taught that our feelings were irrelevant. We weren't allowed to have feelings. I grew up in a home where I was only allowed to act like I was happy. We were brought up in a home where only my father could get angry. My mother was afraid of my father. And so she scurried around to please him. She subjugated her needs for the sake of a man. My sister, my brother, and I got the message. We observed through repetition, observation, and consistency. Our subconscious mind became attuned with this behavior. This is a relationship. As a woman, I shut up. I take care of the man. I have no needs. I suffer in silence. I try to be good enough. I hide myself. I give up all my needs for the sake of the man. I focus on what he thinks and what he feels. And so this became my childhood programming. And true to form, I was 21 and I met my husband and fell in love. It was a magic connection. I never understood it at the time, but it just felt so right. Years later, I realized he mirrored my mother's energy. And so I was a little girl that chased approval and chased her approval, and it felt normal to me. And on a psychological level, it was repetition compulsion. I was just trying to get that need met, feel like I'm good enough, be accepted by my tribe. And so he matched that energy. And after about 12 years of marriage, my body was failing. I had migraine headaches. I had asthma. I had problems with my uterus, a lot of things, rashes. My body was just failing. And I had a doctor say to me, you better listen to your body because your body is listening to you. I was breathing with less than 20% of one lung at the time. And he said to me, there's no physical reason for you to be sick. And that's the first time I felt like I should be listening to what's happening. A codependent doesn't know what they think. A codependent doesn't know how they feel. We guess at what normal is. All we know is that for some reason, I have to make you happy. I'm biologically driven. I am obsessed with how you feel. Whatever it is you need, I have to fulfill it. It's a subconscious need to gain your approval because it's linked to survival. Because if you abandon me, I'm not going to be able to make it in this world. So that set me on the path to looking within and looking within and look. I said to my ex-husband, we have to go into therapy. And he would say, I'm not crazy. You're crazy. You're the one that's unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one that needs to go into therapy. So to please him, I found the 5th therapist. Mm-hmm. When I went to this therapist, he said to me, Lisa, you're depressed, but the depression is the result of codependency. And I said, but he was my husband at the time. I said, he doesn't drink. Isn't codependency associated with alcoholism? He said, you don't have to drink to be codependent, nor do you have to love someone who drinks. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, he told me to read Codependent No More. And Codependent No More was the slap in the face that I needed, because it made me realize that there was something wrong with the way that I was thinking. I was not conscious. Yes, I could breathe. I was an automated being, but I did not have the gift and the blessing of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I was an autopilot person. And when I began to read this book, I thought, where have I been? Mm-hmm. It was so sad that I was this young woman with 3 children, and I had been living a life of subjugation, and I had been regulating myself to adapt to inappropriate behavior, not knowing that I had a right at any point in time to say enough is enough. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that enough is akin to death. Mm-hmm. If I let go of his approval on a biological, chemical level, I'm going to feel like my life is ending. And it did feel like that. So that set me on the path. And when I realized also, it clicked. My mother taught me to be codependent. I taught my children codependency too. Mm. They were 11, 9, 2.5, 3. And I thought, what have I done? Where have I been? And that's what really set me on the path to saying, I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay, because if I stay, I'm going to be forced to continue to model codependency. Mm-hmm. And all of those abandonment fears that everybody talks about, they were right there like fire-breathing dragons. I was terrified. The fear of abandonment, when you have an abandonment issue and you face it, it's like you feel like you've fallen off a cliff backwards into darkness and there's no bottom, because none of your life skills work anymore. You can't people please. You can't enable. You can't subjugate. You know it's wrong. So your brain is literally freaking out. What do you mean you're not going to seek approval? How are you going to feel safe? Mm-hmm. So I had to step into that space of feeling unsafe and to create tools and processes. And it was very much through meditation and journaling and understanding subconsciousness, understanding consciousness, and accessing different levels of consciousness to give me hope, to help me to believe that I can create a new reality. I can do this, but it's going to take time. And my brain has to catch up, because I need the neurological pathways to mirror the next step. And that took time.
You know, as you were talking about your experience, childhood experience, Lisa, maybe I just come from a more traditional society, because I was born in Soviet Union and raised actually in Soviet Union, which was mm-hmm. Probably a little bit more traditional than the Western world. But it did sound to me not like a very unusual kind of environment. You know, kids in my childhood were also not expected to feel uncomfortable feelings. They were expected to be happy, to be smiling. Only the elder was allowed to be angry. Yep. So it doesn't sound like a very unusual kind of thing. Isn't that part of our culture, to actually be pleasing, be nice, and to you know, positive vibes only? Don't be emotionally uncleaned. You know, go out into the world with your uncomfortable emotions, uncomfortable for the rest of the world. Isn't that part of our society in a way?
I think that's part of the problem. If children are taught that they're not allowed to express themselves, how do they get in touch with spirit? How do they really know who they are? How are they ever really sure that they're not doing and being what other people want them to do? How are they ever sure that the way that they behave in society isn't based on some cultural norm or some societal norm. How do I ever know that I'm doing what I want to do as an adult unless I'm able to express myself as a child? And I do think that we can condition children to think, well, this is just the way it is. Children should be seen and not heard. And we can teach children to bypass how they really feel. We can teach, I've coached so many adults who are just like, I thought it was normal not to feel my feelings. It was just, there was a bullseye and I made it to that bullseye. But now I'm looking back and realizing I've missed opportunities to really feel my feelings, to know who I really am, and to feel as if I'm showing up completely empowered for who I am, not worried about what people think, not trying to be who I think someone else wants me to be. I think in the best case scenario that when we are born, our parents allow us to experience a full gamut of emotions. Why? So that they can teach me to regulate strong emotions, because it's an illusion to think that a healthy individual is someone who doesn't experience strong emotions. We should be able to experience strong emotions and regulate them. Just because I'm angry doesn't mean I'm going to kick the dog. But getting angry helps me identify a boundary. So strong emotions aren't bad. They're just indicators as to where I am. And so I think that we can condition children to think that they're not supposed to be feeling, and there's something wrong with feeling bad, which is toxic positivity. If I think everything's supposed to be great all the time, I don't want to hang out with that person, quite frankly, because how are you going to understand me when I'm really having a bad day? Or are you going to shoo me away and tell me you should just think positive? That's not authentic. I just need an opportunity to feel my feelings, release them, figure out what I'm going to do about them, and move forward. I'm not saying I should wallow in it. Quite the opposite. I'm saying own it, embrace it, figure out where it comes from. Why does that unique thing bother you? Free yourself of the attachment, your ego, the attachment your ego has to that thing. But how do I know what my ego is attached to unless I allow myself to experience all emotions? So if I'm jealous, if I'm jealous, if I'm envious, if I'm angry, if I'm dismissive, those are attachments. And so if I push them down and not acknowledge them, how do I ever transcend them?
But society doesn't accept a lot of emotions, which you mentioned. Well, jealousy, anger are considered not very savory emotions. So I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is, how does a human being even know how to handle strong emotions? Because if we think of anybody who is a little bit overheated, we usually expect them to behave irrationally. And I guess there is no conversation. What does it mean to not feel comfortably for the rest of the society? Like if you come to work and people ask how you're doing and you're not saying, I'm doing fine, then you're being a weirdo.
I think that's part of the issue. I think that I really would hope that society moves to a place where, and this is a very broad conversation and we're broad stroking it. I don't mean to give anyone the impression that I'm talking about someone who relies on a sob story to manipulate people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a relatively healthy person who has a strong emotion because they're stuck in traffic, or their wife has just belittled them. He just walked in the door. He had a tough day and his wife is belittling him about why he forgot to bring home the milk. I'm talking about that's everyday stuff.
Yes.
So I have a right to be upset that my husband forgot the milk. And I have a right to be upset that I had a rough day, I was stuck in traffic and my wife is on my back. To pretend that I don't feel those feelings is going to foster resentment in the relationship. My antidote to that is feel your feelings, accept how you feel, even in your own head. Wow, I'm feeling frustrated right now. She's on my back. I forgot the milk. I'm sorry I forgot the milk. There was a lot of traffic. I should have remembered the milk, but I forgot about the milk. I'm validating myself internally. I'm not reacting. I'm validating how I feel. I'm allowing these emotions to come up. It's self-validation. What we do to children is say, you shouldn't feel that, but I do. Now, what do? So I just pretend I don't feel that way. And I learned to wear a mask. And I learned to wear a mask because you taught me that being human and having many, many different emotions is wrong. And yet that's what makes us human. We're not supposed to be robotic. We're supposed to know what we feel what we feel, and learn how to manage those feelings. But all too often, children are given the sense and are conditioned to think only these emotions are acceptable. And that's how we create children who are trying to be good enough according to what society or their culture says. And they never really feel completely content. They're always chasing. I've coached world-class athletes. I mean, I think Caitlyn Jenner is a perfect example of this, born Bruce Jenner. And the minute he won the gold medal, he thought, oh my God, what have I done? Now he's on the world stage. How is he ever going to be his true self? How is Caitlyn ever going to evolve? But this is a child who got the impression it wasn't okay to have these feelings, to experience these feelings that didn't fit in to his very traditional family. This is a person who was struggling and his desire for success, or her desire for success as a boy, was driven by the fear of being who they were, because exposing himself was akin to death. If I really talk about how I feel, and now we see the consequences of that. Even though this great Olympic medal was won, this person still wasn't happy. This person still wasn't connected to their spirit, which is their true self. And spirit is connected to your emotions.
A lot of the situations that you are describing are actually quite normal situations for humans. And we did talk about being conscious and versus being under the veil of consciousness or unconscious. Isn't the nature of unconsciousness is in the not knowing that you're not being conscious? So how do you find yourself out?
Well, that's why I do the work that I do, and I use my life as an example, as a canvas, because the phrase that I always use is, when you're unaware, you don't know that you're unaware. Right? When you're in trauma, you don't know that you're in trauma. When you are codependent and you are seeking approval out of trauma, out of the fear of being abandoned, you don't know it. It's a subconscious process. And most people who are more conscious and living above the veil, I would say more often than not, they've had this incredible, terrible, painful experience that has caused them to question what they've clung to, caused them to have the dark night of the soul, where you question, where have I been? What have I been doing? And all of the ideas that I've thought were important in my life that I've relied on, they don't work anymore. And so we have this identity collapse. I'm not this person, but then who am I? It's what the great philosophers of all time. And so I think those of us who are interested in consciousness are at an advantage. Those of us who recognize that something wasn't right about my childhood, we're at an advantage. And that's why you and I were discussing earlier, I work in the niche that I work, because people who are codependent don't know that they're living below the veil of consciousness. And they need to know that there's hope in raising your consciousness. So we talk about level 1 consciousness. I'm unconscious. I don't even know. Level 2 is, that's a program and that's a pattern. My mother did that and I'm doing the same thing. Level 3 is, I'm going to actively change the pattern. How do you do that? Today, I'm not going to seek approval. Today, no matter what happens, I'm going to seek approval. Today, when someone asks me a yes or no question, I'm not going to go off on a tangent about why I can't do the thing that they asked me to do. I'm just going to say yes or no and shutty. That is me rewiring my brain and teaching my brain that saying no is not akin to death. They'll survive if I don't watch their dog for the weekend, and so will I. And I'll survive if they get angry. So you're absolutely right. People who are living below the veil of consciousness don't know it. People who allow their emotions to dictate their behaviors are living below the veil of consciousness. People think they are their emotions. No, you're not. They're indicators. You're the observer of the emotion. You're the space between your thoughts. You're not even your thoughts. You're the observer of your thoughts. You're the observer of the observer. Teaching those ideas about consciousness, that's where you get to be your own puppet master from a state of consciousness. And that to me is exciting.
Thank you for that. We do have Marlisa joining us. Hi, Marlisa.
Hi, thank you for having me on. I have a question, Lisa. You answered a little bit of it already about how to transform our subconscious. You were saying 95% of what we do is subconscious. So bringing this to light, you just shared that exercise of, being able to say no without feeling like, we're going to die, or our body feels like we're going to die. Is there another exercise that you might have for us to actively, because it's subconscious, it's more like a reaction. Do you have another exercise that people can do that helps create those pathways so that they start to get set? That was one question I had. And if you have time to answer another question, it was, I can name myself as a recovering codependent, and it was very freeing to understand that. And I'm in a relationship with someone who met me as that, like 8 years ago. And so it's been a challenge to transform our current relationship. So I don't know if you have anything you could speak to about that. Thank you.
Well, I just got goosebumps because I get it, girl. I get it. Okay. So I think it's important that if you or anyone that you know believes that you might be codependent, it's like anything else, study it. Because codependency is a cluster of symptoms. It's not diagnosable. That's why we go into therapy with, we have anxiety, or I have a stomach issue, or I ruminate, or I just keep trying to control this person's behavior. So it's a cluster of symptoms. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm overstep my boundaries with my children. I lose myself worrying about what other people, I try to fix people. So it's a cluster of symptoms. So the more that you understand the cluster of symptoms, the better you are going to be when you use consciousness to catch what you're doing wrong. Because what we have to do is interrupt the pattern. We have to interrupt the subconscious mind. We have to interrupt the neural pathways that just want to follow through with that thought. Oh, you need someone to pick your kids up after school. Well, I'm working till 5, but screw that. I'll go pick up your kids. I'll lose my job to pick up your kids. It's by default. You need me. I got to fill that in. So the more you understand what codependency is and how it manifests, the more able you will be when you are conscious to catch, oh, I just did that, right? So in a relationship with your boyfriend, if you maybe, let's just use a silly analogy. Let's say, and I'm not implying this at all, but let's say you're dating someone who's irresponsible, right? Can't pay the car payment or is having trouble paying the rent because he drinks too much. And so now as a codependent, what do? You jump in, you pay the rent, you pay the car payment. As a recovering codependent, you say things like, good luck with paying the car payment this month. You don't pay the car payment this month. Now what's going to happen is your survival brain is going to kick in. You're going to feel like this is bad, something bad's going to happen. So you have to regulate that trauma response. So let me give you a tool. One of the tools that I teach is the 1, 2, 3 process. We have to understand that codependents generally are jumping over how they feel. I know what you feel, and I don't want you to feel that, but I don't know how I feel. So once we identify that as a problem, then we know that, I have to come back to the self. I have to figure out how I feel, because codependents are other focused. Now that we identify that problem, I have to become self-focused, not a narcissistic way, but I don't have healthy narcissism. So I have to reorient myself to the self, and the self that I think I am has to start being good. I have to start thinking that my inner self is enough and is worthy, and I don't have to keep paying the rent for someone who's irresponsible to feel good enough. Make sense?
Yes. So I hear you saying pausing is a really good practice, like just a simple pause before answering, right, which has been very helpful to me as well. And that I have a different relationship with anger or someone else's anger. And I've been able to have containers where it's okay for people to get angry and that it's not mine and I can be there with them.
Correct.
And just as I want to have my feelings, they are allowed to have their feelings and not be enmeshed with feelings.
Correct. And you don't have to take responsibility for them, or do you have to fix them? So codependents feel guilty when someone gets angry. And so we try to fix it. So you're identifying your boundary, when you get activated when someone else gets angry. So let me teach you the 1, 2, 3 process. So we have to pay attention to how we feel so we can develop boundaries. Emotions are really important. So let's say you notice someone's upset. So you have to be careful, because the minute you notice someone's upset, eyes are off you. So you have to bring the eyes back to you. So what happens to me when someone else gets upset? I get upset that they're upset. Classic codependency. My mood depends on your mood. So now that I notice, wow, I'm feeling a little anxious, like I'm coming out of my skin because my husband just walked in the house, and he slammed his keys on the table. I'm getting activated, because in my house as a little girl, when daddy came home angry, everything got thrown up. Everything was crazy. And that created a trauma response. So my brain is activated. As a codependent, I want to fix it, but I know I can't do that anymore. So I'm just going to pay attention to how I feel. So the number one thing is I notice and I acknowledge that I'm feeling a little anxious. Just stay in that space for a little bit. Just, okay, I can feel that coming up, not focusing on the other person. I can sense that I'm feeling a little anxious right now. The second step is, number 2 is, where do you feel it in your body? Because you're not connected to your body. So how do I know that I'm upset? Oh, my stomach's churning. My heart space feels like it's constricted and contracted. My shoulders just came up. My body feels stiff. I feel like I'm bracing for impact. Okay, that's how my body tells me it's frightened and it's uptight and it's getting nervous. This is the important step. It's all important. But the third step is you have to make a decision about how you feel, because codependents are emotionally paralyzed. So the third step is make a decision. Decide what you're going to do about how you feel. 3 steps. What can't I control? What can I control? And how do I want to feel on a regular basis? Well, I can't control that this trauma response has already been activated. That's normal. My brain's just remembering. I can't control how my husband or my boyfriend or my daughter or what, I can't control that. Can't control that. I can't control their response. I can't control their behavior. I can't control that. Well, what can I control? I can control whether or not I jump in to fix it. I can control whether I open my mouth and I let something codependent come out or something controlling come out. I can control whether or not I act that way. I can control whether or not I go for a walk. I can control whether or not I allow it to come up. I can control whether or not I journal about it. I can control whether or not I see this as a lesson. What am I learning here about myself, about boundaries, about putting myself before codependency? What am I learning about self-preservation and self-love? What do I really need to know in this situation right here with my husband or my boyfriend? I can choose to see it as a lesson. How do I want to feel? For me, I want peace. I want equanimity. I want ego detachment. I don't want attachments. I don't want my mood to be affected by what's happening outside of me anymore. I've lived my life like that, not doing it anymore. So now that I know that I want peace, I'm probably going to decide to do nothing. I'm probably just going to allow my husband to be angry. I'm probably going to give him his space. I'm probably not going to try to control it. I'm probably going to go for a walk or say, babe, I'm going for a walk. I'll talk to you later. If you need me, give me a call. I'm probably going to be with my inner child who gets terrified when a man walks in the door at the end of the night, upset, and begins to frighten her because he is out of control. I'm probably going to go nurture my inner child. If you do that every day for the rest of your life, you will find contentment. You will find peace. You will find happiness. You will have a smile on your face. You will no longer be controlled by the past. You will be no longer controlled by what's happening around you. And the best part, you can create a new future. Did I answer all your questions?
Absolutely. And that also feels really powerful, like a very self-sufficient, powerful place.
Correct.
That you can practice from. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. We're all on the path to return back to love. Codependency is about, I don't love myself, and somehow I got the message that I'm bad, and I have to prove to you that I'm not bad. And so I'm just going to be everything that you need, so you never leave me. Because and then I have to hide myself, because if I let myself out, then you're going to see what my mother taught me to believe was bad. I can't do that. And so codependency is the path back to the self. Codependency recovery is the path back to the divine self. I am enough. I don't have to jump through hoops for people. Everybody's just as flawed as I am. Everyone's getting out of here the same way I am. We're not getting out of here standing up. We all came to planet Earth the same way. We're all leaving the same way. We're all here just to learn from one another. And I don't have to subjugate my needs for the sake of a relationship anymore.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Marie-Lisa, for joining us. Unfortunately, looking at the time, I don't think I will be able to bring up anyone else. There are quite a lot of questions, so I'll ask this question because it comes logically now, but it usually is the last question. So, Lisa, if people want to work with you, if they feel that they have a trauma to heal, how can they get hold of you, or how can they work with you?
Sure. They can go to my website at www.lisaaromano.com. I'm also on YouTube. I'm on Instagram, but if they want to participate in one of my coaching programs, they can do that by just going to my website, www.lisaaromano.com. They can also find me on Amazon. I've written 8 or 9 books that they can start diving into. Yeah.
And do you do coaching one-on-one, or do you do like group therapy as well?
I do one-to-one coaching, as well as we have group coaching sessions during live coaching classes. I also have a membership site where we offer one group coaching class a month inside the membership. So yes.
Thank you for that. I do have a little bit more time left. I actually was very curious to talk about narcissism a little bit, but I don't think we'll have time for that. Instead, I want to ask a question. You know, nowadays we are becoming a little bit more aware of all sorts of labels that are out there, and we've even mentioned quite a few here. Well, a codependent relationship, of course, probably is a little fairer because it's a two-way street. But such labels as narcissist, as toxic person, and even psychopath, or sociopath, and very often we actually put them very liberally around ourselves. What do you think? How justified are we to actually judge other people in our life with such harsh words occasionally, and then dive into trying to diagnose the world around us, or should we thread this a little bit more cautiously?
I think we should always be cautious, but I think everything is going to come down to your intention. So if I walk into a zoo and I see labels, gorilla, alligator, and shark, that's for my benefit. I'm discerning. Don't swim with the shark, but you might be able to go swim with the dolphins. Don't go into the silverback gorilla exhibit, but you might be able to go into the koala exhibit. So if you're using labels to discern, I think it's very helpful. And I also think someone who is highly empathic, it's proven, they've done research that women who are highly empathic, women who are highly successful, women who don't give up, so they have businesses and they are headstrong, and they know if there's a problem, if they throw enough energy at it, they'll be able to fix it. These are the women who tend to be in relationships with sociopaths and psychopaths, because we don't give up. And so when I understand that this is a label for me that I have to pay attention to, when I understand that a label on outside of me is about discernment, it's the same reason I tell my children, my daughters, you probably shouldn't walk between two cars and there's a van there, just to avoid vans. I'm not judging the white van. I'm just saying, like, avoid vans for discernment. I also think that if you are someone who is out there just labeling people so that you can feel better about yourself, that's narcissistic. But I think if you're someone who's truly wounded and you're trying to understand interpersonal relationships because you've been a victim of someone who is a predator, because predators exist. We can't pretend that their predator personalities don't exist. That doesn't do us any good. We have to acknowledge that it does exist, but we have to raise our consciousness around our traits. We have to make sure that we're showing up authentic. And we have to make sure that when we're out in the world and we're relating to people, we're able to set boundaries. And if someone looks like a sheep and then turns into a wolf, I'm not ignoring that red flag. And when I call my girlfriend and go, oh, wow, I thought he was such a nice guy, but, then he slapped the waitress on the butt and then said he didn't. And then when I said to him, I saw you do that, he said, no, it's all in your head. I never did that. I think that's a high narcissistic trait. That's very useful information. That's not throwing a label out there. That's protecting yourself.
So how do you recognize with narcissism? I think it's a little bit complicated because we are trained to recognize the narcissists who are tooting their own horn a lot. But as far as I know, that's not as simple as that. How do you recognize, well, you use the term predatory behavior or well, I will use the label, but the kind of people who can be dangerous to you or toxic people, right? So how do you recognize?
I think it's important that you're not doing anything wrong. The creator has given you the ability to discern. That's what your divine instinct is. So you just developing language around, oh, that lacked empathy, or that was self-righteous, or if that was arrogance, you're not doing anything wrong as long as you're coming at it with the true intention of love and light to avoid this in your life, or to help someone else see what they're doing. But narcissistic personality it exists on a spectrum, and it's not easy to diagnose. But you can teach yourself to recognize narcissism in yourself, unhealthy narcissism in yourself, as well as other people. But across the board, what we're looking for is a lack of empathy for other people's feelings. We're looking for someone who has no problem exploiting the emotions, the finances of another person, or using you because you know somebody. That's exploitation. You are a means to an end for someone who has narcissistic traits. So it's a lack of empathy, exploitation, and a sense of entitlement. I have a right to treat people less than. So if you look for those three traits, make sure that if you have them, try to pull them back. Develop a little bit more empathy, care about how people feel. It's not just about you. If you feel a little entitled, or you catch yourself acting in an entitled way, know that you're dipping into the narcissistic pool. Try to pull that back. You're not better than anybody else, and no one else is better than you. Look for the middle zone. Try to be fair. And if you notice it in other people, rather than focus on it and try to change it, you might want to just be aware of it and maybe move out of that relationship and not get pulled into the relationship unnecessarily.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to be finishing this conversation. Traditionally, I want to ask people who are in the audience right now to leave a heart for my wonderful guests in the chat. If you're watching it in recording, then leave your heart in the comments below the video. Yeah, here the hearts are coming.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your wisdom and for actually going so deep with the answer to Marie-Lisa, who joined us as well. Thank you guys who were in the audience for communicating and for leaving your hearts as well. And yeah, for joining me into my honest conversations every week. I do hope we'll get a chance to talk about narcissism Sunday, because I think this is such a fascinating topic. And it's a pity we didn't go deeper into that. But thank you once again, and I'll see you in a week.
Thank you. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.